One of them died suddenly, leaving millions of fans heartbroken and struggling to accept that he was gone. Another spent years battling addiction while trying to escape the pressure of growing up in front of the entire world. One quietly walked away from Hollywood after fame became emotionally overwhelming. And behind the laughter, hugs, and family warmth that made Full House one of America's most beloved sitcoms, there were real lives shaped by grief, loneliness, pressure, and loss. For millions of viewers, Full House felt safe. It felt comforting. Every week, audiences stepped inside a San Francisco home filled with love, humor, and the kind of family many people wished they had. Danny Tanner always had the right advice. Jesse brought the cool confidence. Joey made everyone laugh. And three little girls grew up in front of America's eyes. The show became more than television. It became part of childhood itself. But while audiences watched a perfect television family overcome every problem in 30 minutes, real life offered no such happy endings. Because fame has a way of changing people, especially children, especially those who spend their most vulnerable years under the spotlight. Some members of the Full House cast carried emotional scars long after the cameras stopped rolling. Others faced addiction, personal struggles, public heartbreak, and the painful challenge of being forever connected to characters audiences refused to let go. And then came the tragedy nobody expected, the loss that shattered fans across the world and forever changed the Full House family. Because sometimes the shows that make us feel safest hide the deepest heartbreaks behind the scenes. And by the end of this story, Full House may feel less like a sitcom and more like a reminder of how fragile life really is. When Full House first arrived on television in 1987, nobody expected it to become one of the most beloved family sitcoms in American history. The premise seemed simple. A widowed father struggling to raise three daughters after the sudden death of his wife. His best friend moved in to help. His brother-in-law joined the family, and together they somehow found a way to survive the chaos of everyday life. But what made Full House special was never the storyline itself. It was the feeling, the warmth, the comfort, the sense that no matter how difficult life became, somebody would always be there for you at the end of the day. For millions of Americans, Full House became part of their childhood routine. Families gathered around the television together. Parents watched with their children. Children grew up alongside DJ, Stephanie, and Michelle Tanner. And over time, the Tanner family stopped feeling fictional. They felt real. Danny Tanner became the father many people wished they had. Uncle Jesse became the cool relative everyone wanted in their family. Joey became the friend who could always make bad days feel better. And then there were the girls. Audiences watched them grow up year after year, lose teeth, learn lessons, make mistakes, cry, laugh, and slowly become young women. That emotional connection became incredibly powerful because viewers were not simply watching characters. They were watching childhood itself, which is exactly why Full House continues to affect audiences so deeply decades later. The show represented something many people feel is disappearing from modern television. Optimism, kindness, family, forgiveness, a belief that people could overcome hardship together. But perhaps that nostalgia feels even stronger today, because audiences now know what happened afterward. They know life did not stay frozen inside the Tanner home. The actors grew older. The children became adults. The careers changed. The struggles began. And one day, one of the most beloved members of the Full House family would be gone forever. Suddenly, those old episodes felt different. The laughter became bittersweet. The family hugs became emotional. And the sitcom that once felt completely carefree started carrying something else beneath the surface. Loss. Because while Full House taught viewers that family lasts forever, real life would eventually test that belief in heartbreaking ways. For millions of fans, John Stamos was Uncle Jesse. Cool, confident, funny, the motorcycle-riding rock-and-roll dream uncle every kid wished they had, and every adult secretly wanted to be. With his leather jackets, Elvis obsession, and effortless charm, Uncle Jesse quickly became one of the most iconic television characters of the late 1980s and early 1990s. And for a while it seemed like John Stamos was living the perfect Hollywood life. The fame, the attention, the success, the admiration, everything looked effortless. But behind the image audiences adored, Stamos was quietly carrying pressures few people understood. Because fame built on charm creates its own kind of prison. The audience falls in love with a version of you, and then spends decades expecting that version to never change. For years after Full House ended, Stamos struggled with something many television stars face but rarely discuss openly. The fear of becoming irrelevant. The fear that your greatest success may already be behind you. The fear that the character people love is more important than the person you actually are. While audiences continued celebrating Uncle Jesse through reruns, nostalgia specials, and endless memories, Stamos found himself trying to build a life beyond the role that defined him. Some projects succeeded, others disappeared quickly, but no matter where he went, one truth followed him everywhere. To millions of people, he would always be Uncle Jesse. And as the years passed, the emotional weight of that reality became increasingly complicated. Then came personal heartbreak. Relationships ended. Dreams changed. Time moved forward. And like so many actors who spent decades in Hollywood, Stamos quietly wrestled with insecurities he rarely showed publicly. The pressure eventually became overwhelming. In 2015, after years of emotional strain and personal struggles, Stamos entered treatment for substance-related issues and publicly acknowledged that he needed help. For many fans, the news was shocking. Uncle Jesse was supposed to have everything together, but suddenly audiences saw something very different. Not a television icon, not a celebrity, just a man struggling to cope with life the same way millions of ordinary people do. And strangely, that vulnerability made audiences love him even more, because beneath all the charm and confidence, people finally saw the human being underneath the character. As he grew older, Stamos became increasingly honest about loneliness, aging, regret, and the emotional challenge of surviving Hollywood for decades. And perhaps that honesty became his greatest achievement. Not fame, not success, not even Full House, but the willingness to admit that life is harder than it looks. Today, when fans see John Stamos revisit Full House memories, there is often a bittersweet sadness in those moments, because every reunion reminds audiences of how much time has passed. The young uncle from television is no longer young. The children he helped raise on screen are adults. And the world that made Full House famous exists mostly inside memory now. Yet somehow, Stamos remains one of the emotional bridges connecting fans back to that era. A living reminder of childhood, family, and the comforting illusion that some things might last forever. But while John Stamos struggled with the pressure of carrying a beloved legacy, another member of the Full House family was facing a battle far darker than anything audiences could see. And her story would become one of the most heartbreaking journeys of growing up in front of America. For an entire generation of viewers, Jodie Sweetin was Stephanie Tanner, the middle child, the funny one, the little girl who could make audiences laugh with a single line. "How rude" became one of the most recognizable catchphrases in television history. Week after week, America watched Stephanie grow up. Viewers celebrated her milestones, her childhood, her awkward years, her emotional moments. And because Full House felt so much like a real family, audiences often forgot something important. Jodie Sweetin was not playing childhood. She was living hers in front of millions of strangers. And that kind of pressure can leave scars that last long after the cameras stop rolling. When Full House ended, Jodie was still incredibly young. Most children her age were trying to figure out who they were. But Jodie faced a completely different challenge. She had to figure out who she was without Stephanie Tanner. The transition proved far more difficult than anyone realized. The fame that once felt exciting slowly became confusing, then lonely, then dangerous. Like many former child stars, Sweetin struggled with the emotional void left behind when the spotlight suddenly disappeared. The audience moved on, Hollywood moved on, but the pressure remained. And somewhere along the way, she began searching for ways to cope. What followed became one of the most painful chapters connected to the entire Full House cast. Addiction. It started quietly, then gradually consumed years of her life. Alcohol, drugs, self-destruction, The little girl millions of Americans remembered from their childhood was now fighting battles most of them could never imagine. And perhaps what made it even more heartbreaking was the contrast. Viewers still watched reruns of Full House every day. On television, Stephanie Tanner remained forever innocent, forever safe, forever loved. Meanwhile, the real person behind the character was struggling to survive. There were moments when her addiction became so severe that even those closest to her feared the worst. The headlines became painful. The public scrutiny became relentless. And for a while it seemed like Jodie Sweetin might become another tragic Hollywood child star story. Another life swallowed by fame too early. Another person unable to escape the shadow of childhood success. But somehow, she fought her way back. Recovery did not happen overnight. It took years. Mistakes, relapses, painful honesty, and enormous courage. Because recovering publicly is difficult enough. Recovering while millions of people remember you as a child is something else entirely. What makes Jodie Sweetin's story so powerful today is not simply that she struggled. Many people struggle. It is that she survived. She eventually spoke openly about addiction, recovery, shame, and healing in ways that inspired countless people facing similar battles. And suddenly, audiences began seeing her differently. Not as Stephanie Tanner, not as a former child star, but as a survivor, someone who had fallen apart and somehow rebuilt herself piece by piece. Perhaps that transformation became more meaningful than fame ever was. Because while Full House taught audiences lessons about family and resilience, Jodie Sweetin ended up living those lessons in real life. Yet as emotional as her journey became, another member of the Full House family was carrying a burden that felt even heavier. Because while Jodie fought addiction publicly, someone else was quietly becoming one of the most beloved figures in television history. And his sudden loss would eventually leave millions of fans completely heartbroken. For millions of viewers, Bob Saget was Danny Tanner, the loving father, the voice of reason, the man who somehow managed to hold an entire family together through every challenge life threw at them. On Full House, Danny Tanner represented safety. No matter what happened during an episode, audiences knew Danny would be there at the end with advice, compassion, and a reminder that family could overcome anything. And over time, that comforting image became deeply embedded in American culture. But the real Bob Saget was far more complicated than the character people remembered. Behind the wholesome television father was a comedian with a much edgier personality. Friends described him as hilarious, generous, loyal, and incredibly kind. Yet there was always a strange contrast between the family man audiences loved and the sharp, often outrageous comedian who existed off-screen. For years, Saget balanced both worlds. The television father, the stand-up comic, the actor, the friend, and somehow, he managed to remain one of the most beloved figures in entertainment. What many people didn't realize was how deeply connected he remained to the Full House cast long after the series ended. The younger actors often spoke about him not as a co-worker, but especially the Olsen twins, Jodie Sweetin, Candace Cameron Bure, Andrea Barber. He watched them grow up, protected them, guided them, supported them through some of the most difficult moments of their lives. In many ways, Danny Tanner never truly disappeared. Bob Saget simply became him, which is why what happened next felt so devastating. In January 2022, news broke that Bob Saget had died unexpectedly at the age of 65. The shock was immediate. Fans could not believe it. His castmates could not believe it. The entertainment industry could not believe it. Only hours before, he had been performing stand-up comedy, talking with fans, making people laugh, living his life. Then suddenly, he was gone. The loss felt unreal. And perhaps what made it even more heartbreaking was how deeply loved he was by those who knew him personally. Tributes poured in from everywhere. Friends described him as one of the kindest people they had ever met. Cast members spoke openly about their grief. Some admitted they felt as if they had lost a real family member. They felt because in many ways they had. For audiences, the loss of Bob Saget carried a different kind of sadness. It felt like losing part of childhood itself. The man who spent years teaching lessons about family, kindness, and love was suddenly no longer here. and every Full House episode changed forever after that. Now, when viewers watch Danny Tanner hugging his daughters or offering advice around the kitchen table, there is an emotional weight that did not exist before, because they know how the story ends. The laughter is still there, the warmth is still there, but so is the sadness. And perhaps that is what makes Bob Saget's legacy so powerful. He spent decades making people feel safe, making people laugh, making people believe family mattered. And when he left, millions of people realized just how much he had meant to them. Yet somehow, even Bob Saget's heartbreaking loss was not the final emotional chapter of the Full House story, because the greatest tragedy of all may be realizing how quickly time passed for everyone. The children grew up, the parents grew older, the family changed, and the world that once felt permanent slowly became a memory. For many viewers, Michelle Tanner was the heart of Full House. The tiny smile, the adorable catchphrases, the moments that made audiences laugh without even trying. From the very beginning, Michelle became one of the most beloved child characters in television history. But what many people forget is that Michelle Tanner was not played by one child. She was played by two, Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen. And while America saw one charming little girl on screen, two real children were quietly growing up inside one of the biggest television phenomena of their generation. At first, it seemed magical. The twins became household names before they were even old enough to understand what fame meant. Millions of people knew their faces. Toy companies wanted them. Publishers wanted them. Hollywood wanted them. Soon, they were no longer simply cast members on Full House. They became a business empire. Movies, books, marchandises, television specials. By the time most children were learning multiplication tables, Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen were already among the most recognizable young celebrities in America. And that kind of fame comes with a hidden cost. Because when childhood becomes a product, it slowly stops feeling like childhood at all. The audience saw success, but behind the scenes the pressure was relentless. Schedules, expectations, responsibility, constant attention. Every year the Olsen twins became less like ordinary children and more like public property. Millions felt connected to them, yet very few people actually knew them. And perhaps that emotional isolation became one of the defining themes of their lives. As they entered adolescence, the pressure only intensified. The media followed them constantly. Every appearance became news. Every mistake became a headline. Every personal struggle became public conversation. Then came one of the most painful periods of all. Mary-Kate Olsen began battling serious personal and health struggles as a young adult. Suddenly, the child America remembered from Full House was facing intense scrutiny at one of the most vulnerable periods of her life. Tabloids were ruthless, speculation exploded everywhere, and once again, the world seemed far more interested in the image than the person behind it. For many former child stars, fame ends when childhood ends. For the Olsen twins, the opposite happened. The spotlight became even brighter, and perhaps that is why their eventual decision shocked so many people. They walked away, not just from Full House, from Hollywood itself. At the height of their fame and influence, they chose something almost unheard of in celebrity culture: privacy, distance, normalcy, or at least as much normalcy as two of the most famous former child stars in America could ever hope to find. Instead of chasing more fame, they built successful careers in fashion and quietly disappeared from the entertainment industry that had defined their entire childhood. Some fans were disappointed. Others were confused. But perhaps their decision makes perfect sense now, because after spending nearly their entire lives under public scrutiny, they simply wanted something money and fame could never guarantee: peace. And maybe that is the hidden tragedy behind the Olsen twins' story. The world spent decades wanting more from them. More movies, more interviews, more appearances, more Michelle Tanner. But eventually, they chose themselves instead. And perhaps that decision required more courage than anyone realized. Yet even as the Olsen twins stepped away from the spotlight, the emotional center of the Full House family remained connected through one man. One person who represented home for the entire cast. One person whose loss would forever change how they viewed the show, their childhood, and each other. Because after Bob Saget's death, Full House was no longer simply a television memory. It became a family mourning someone they genuinely loved. When Full House ended in 1995, it felt like the end of a television show. But for the cast, it was something far more complicated. It was the end of a family. For nearly a decade, they had grown up together, worked together, celebrated birthdays together, watched children become teenagers, watched strangers become relatives. And perhaps that is why Full House feels different from so many other sitcoms. The connection was not entirely acting. Many of them genuinely loved one another, which made the years that followed both beautiful and heartbreaking. Candace Cameron Bure, who played DJ Tanner, entered adulthood carrying the strange burden of being permanently connected to one of television's most beloved daughters. For millions of viewers, she represented innocence, responsibility, family values. But growing up after childhood fame is rarely simple. Like many former child actors, she spent years trying to establish an identity beyond the role that made her famous. The challenge was not finding success. The challenge was escaping comparison. Because audiences rarely allow child stars to grow up, they remember the child forever. Meanwhile, the real person continues changing, aging, learning, making mistakes, trying to discover who they really are. Andrea Barber faced a different struggle. As Kimmy Gibbler, she became one of the most recognizable sitcom neighbors in television history. Yet after Full House ended, she stepped away from Hollywood almost completely. Many fans assumed she disappeared because her career failed. The truth was more personal. She simply wanted a life away from fame. But even after leaving television, emotional battles followed her. Years later, Barber spoke openly about anxiety, depression, and the hidden psychological challenges that can linger long after the spotlight fades. And suddenly, fans realized something important. The actors they grew up watching were carrying struggles of their own. They were not frozen in happiness inside old episodes. They were human beings navigating real life. The same was true for nearly every member of the cast. Some found peace. Some found reinvention. Others spent years wrestling with nostalgia itself. Because nostalgia can be comforting, but it can also be painful. Every reunion reminds you how much time has passed. Every old photograph reminds you of people who are no longer here. Every episode becomes a window into a version of life that can never return. That reality became especially emotional when the cast reunited years later for Fuller House. On the surface, it looked joyful, and in many ways it was. Fans were thrilled. The family was back together. The house still felt familiar. The laughter still sounded the same. But beneath the smiles, everyone understood something the audience was beginning to realize too. Nothing lasts forever. Not childhood. Not fame, not television, not even families, because time changes everything. And then, after Bob Saget's sudden death, that truth became impossible to ignore. The reunions felt different. The memories felt heavier. The laughter carried sadness beneath it. And suddenly, Full House was no longer simply a nostalgic sitcom from the past. It became a reminder of everyone we have loved and lost along the way. But the most emotional chapter of the Full House story was still waiting, because the true legacy of the show was never about ratings, popularity, or television success. It was about something far more powerful, the passage of time itself. Perhaps the greatest surprise about Full House is that it was never really about comedy, not at its core. Yes, people remember the jokes, the catchphrases, the funny misunderstandings, the endless hugs and life lessons around the Tanner family kitchen. But decades later, that is not what keeps people coming back. What they remember is how the show made them feel safe, loved, understood. And perhaps that emotional connection feels even stronger today, because the world that created Full House seems so far away now. When audiences watch old episodes, they are not simply revisiting a television series. They are revisiting a version of themselves, a younger version. A version that still sat beside parents on the couch. A version that still believed family would always stay together. A version that had no idea how quickly life could change. That is why Full House became more emotional with age. Not because the show changed, because the audience did. The children who watched Michelle Tanner are now adults raising families of their own. The teenagers who admired DJ Tanner now look back on those years with nostalgia. The parents who watched Danny Tanner guide his daughters often find themselves thinking about their own children growing up far too fast. And somewhere along the way, Full House stopped being entertainment. It became memory. Then came the loss of Bob Saget. And suddenly, everything felt different. The episodes still existed. The laughter was still there. But now every scene carried something else. A quiet sadness. Because viewers understood that the father figure who helped shape so many childhood memories was gone. For the cast, the loss was deeply personal. For the audience, it felt strangely personal too. Because Bob Saget represented something larger than a television character. He represented stability, comfort, home. And when he died, millions of people felt as though they had lost a small piece of their own past. Perhaps that is why tributes poured in from every corner of the entertainment world. Not because he was famous, because he was loved. And that distinction matters. Fame fades. Love does not. Years from now, new generations may discover Full House for the first time. They may laugh at Joey's jokes, smile at Uncle Jesse, watch Stephanie and Michelle grow up, and they may never fully understand why older viewers become emotional talking about the show. But those who lived through that era understand immediately. Because Full House was never just a sitcom. It was a companion, a comfort, a reminder that even after tragedy, families could heal. Even after loss, people could move forward. And maybe that is why the show continues surviving long after so many others have been forgotten. Not because it was perfect, but because it offered something people desperately needed: hope. And perhaps that is the most beautiful legacy any television show can leave behind. Final part, the laughter faded. The memories never did. Today, when people hear the Full House theme song, something remarkable happens. For a brief moment, time seems to stop. Suddenly, they are back in another chapter of life. Back when the Tanner family felt like relatives. Back when problems could be solved with a heartfelt conversation. Back when television still believed kindness mattered. And perhaps that is why Full House remains so beloved after all these years. Not because of celebrity, not because of ratings, not because of fame, but because it gave people comfort. The cast members who once filled America's living rooms have experienced the same struggles every human being eventually faces. Addiction, loss, aching, heartbreak, loneliness, the fear of being forgotten. Some survived those battles publicly, others quietly. Some walked away from Hollywood entirely. Others remained connected to the industry that shaped their lives. But every one of them was changed by time, just like the audience was. Bob Saget is gone. The little girls are grown adults. The young stars are no longer young. And the world that made Full House a cultural phenomenon exists mostly inside memory now. Yet somehow, the emotional connection remains untouched. Because while fame disappears and careers fade, something more important survived. The feeling, the warmth, the belief that family can help people survive even the hardest moments of life. That message still resonates today, maybe even more than it did when the show first aired. Because as people grow older, they begin to understand what Full House was really trying to say all along. Life is fragile. Time moves quickly. The people we love will not always be here. And that is exactly why those moments matter so much. The cameras stopped rolling years ago. The Tanner family dinner table grew quiet, and one of its most beloved fathers is gone. But somewhere, every day, someone presses play on an old episode of Full House, and for 30 minutes, the family comes together again. The laughter returns. The memories return. And for a little while, home still feels exactly the same.